Man notices baby boy being raised by 4 bulldogs. The story will shock you. The bitter October wind whipped through Jack Morrison's coat as he stood before the weathered "Welcome to Millbrook" sign, population 2,187. The number seemed optimistic. He hadn't passed more than a dozen cars on his drive through the sleepy town's main street. Perfect, he thought. Exactly what he needed after everything that had happened in Boston. 3 months ago, Jack had been a rising star in corporate law, burning the midnight oil in a glass-walled office with a view of the harbor. Now, he was jobless, divorced, and standing in front of a Victorian fixer-upper that looked like it had last seen a coat of paint when Nixon was president. The realtor had called it a steal. Looking at the sagging porch and overgrown yard, Jack was starting to understand why. "Home sweet home," he muttered, fishing the keys from his pocket. The lock stuck, requiring a bit of coaxing before it finally surrendered with a rusty groan. Inside, the house smelled of dust and forgotten memories, but beneath the cobwebs and creaky floorboards, Jack saw potential. This was his fresh start, his chance to rebuild everything from scratch. As he lugged boxes from his SUV to the house, an elderly woman emerged from the neighboring property, clutching a casserole dish like a shield. "You must be the new owner," she called out, her voice quavering slightly. "I'm Margaret Whitaker. Been living next door for 40 years. Jack set down a box labeled "Kitchen" and crossed the yard to meet her. "Jack Morrison. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Whitaker. Margaret, please." She thrust the casserole dish toward him. "Chicken pot pie. Everyone needs a good meal on moving day." Her eyes darted past him to the road, then back. "You're not planning on staying long, are you?" The question caught him off guard. "I actually just bought the place. Planning to fix it up, maybe start a small law practice in town." Margaret's weathered face creased with concern. "Oh dear. Nobody told you about the Holland farm, did they?" "The what?" She pointed past his property to where the maintained lawns gave way to wild grass and twisted trees. In the distance, Jack could make out the dark shape of what might have been a barn or large house, almost completely swallowed by vegetation. "The Holland place. Been abandoned going on 2 years now. Strange things happen out there, especially at night. The sounds..." She shuddered. "Well, just keep your doors locked after dark. And maybe think twice about staying too long." Before Jack could press her for details, Margaret had already turned and was hurrying back to her house, leaving him holding the pot pie and a head full of questions. He spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking, trying to dismiss her cryptic warning as small-town superstition. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his new property, he found his eyes drawn repeatedly to that distant shape in the wilderness. Night fell early this far from the city. Jack was in his makeshift bedroom, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, when he first heard it, a deep, resonant bark that seemed to echo across the empty fields. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Another bark, followed by several more, forming an eerie chorus that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Just some farmers' dogs," he told himself. But something about the sound felt wrong. These weren't the casual barks of farm dogs announcing a passing car or wild animal. There was an urgency to them, almost like a warning. Then he heard something else, something that made him shocked. Beneath the barking, barely audible but unmistakable, came the sound of a child crying. Jack grabbed his phone and flashlight, hands trembling slightly as he dialed the local police. After 4 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Millbrook Police, Officer Jenkins speaking." "Hi, yes, I'm Jack Morrison. I just moved into 1247 Oak Road. I'm hearing some concerning sounds from the abandoned farm next door, dogs barking and what sounds like a child crying." There was a long pause on the other end. "The Holland place?" "Yes, I think that's what my neighbor called it." "Listen, Mr. Morrison." Officer Jenkins's voice had taken on an odd tone. "We've had a lot of calls about that property over the years. Natural sounds can play tricks on you out there, especially at night. Wind in the old buildings, coyotes, that sort of thing. Nothing to worry about. But I'm sure I heard." Best thing you can do is stay in your house and mind your own business. Have a good night, Mr. Morrison." The line went dead, leaving Jack staring at his phone in disbelief. The barking had stopped, but he could still hear that faint crying, carried on the wind like a ghost's whisper. Something was very wrong in Millbrook, and apparently, the local police had no interest in investigating. Jack spent the rest of the night pacing his new home, unable to sleep. He tried researching the Holland farm online, but the town's ancient DSL connection could barely load Google, let alone provide any useful information. The crying had stopped around midnight, but the memory of it haunted him. As dawn broke over the frost-covered fields, Jack made a decision. The legal training that had made him successful in Boston was kicking in. When something doesn't add up, dig deeper. He would investigate the farm himself, regardless of what the locals thought. But first, he needed to learn more about the Holland family, and why everyone in town seemed so determined to pretend they didn't exist. Looking out his bedroom window at the distant farmhouse, now visible in the gray morning light, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled onto something far more sinister than small-town secrets. The barking dogs, the crying child, the police's dismissive response, Margaret's warning, none of it added up to anything good. What he didn't know yet was that his decision to investigate would not only unravel a web of dark secrets, but also put him on a collision course with forces that would change his life forever. The Holland farm held mysteries deeper and more dangerous than anything he could imagine, and somewhere in that overgrown wilderness, four unlikely guardians were protecting a truth that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals. The following afternoon, Jack found himself standing at the rusted gates of the Holland farm, armed with nothing but a backpack containing water, his phone, and a first aid kit. He'd spent the morning at the local diner, attempting to gather information about the property, but the moment he'd mentioned the Holland name, conversations had died and backs had turned. The waitress, a young woman named Sarah, had slipped him a note with his coffee. "Leave it alone, please." But the crying he'd heard last night wouldn't let him rest. As a lawyer, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and everything about this situation screamed wrongness. The gate's chain had long since rusted through, allowing him to push it open with an ominous creak that seemed to echo across the overgrown fields. The driveway, once gravel, was now a serpentine path through knee-high grass. Jack followed it slowly, every sense on high alert. The farmhouse loomed ahead, a two-story Victorian that might have been beautiful once, before nature and neglect had taken their toll. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth, and thick vines crawled up the walls like grasping fingers. A sudden movement caught his eye, something large and dark darting between the rusted hulks of abandoned farm equipment. Jack froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Another flash of movement, this time from his left. He turned slowly, and he was shocked. Four massive bulldogs had emerged from the tall grass, forming a semicircle around him. Their muscular bodies were scarred and dirty, but their eyes held an intelligence that made them even more terrifying. These weren't feral strays, they moved with purpose, with coordination. The largest one, a brindle male with a notched ear, took a step forward and released a low, rumbling growl. Jack's first instinct was to run, but his experience with his sister's rescue dogs told him that would be a fatal mistake. Instead, he slowly lowered himself to a crouch, avoiding direct eye contact while keeping the dogs in his peripheral vision. "Easy," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." The brindle dog's growl subsided slightly, replaced by a curious tilt of his massive head. Then, unexpectedly, came the sound that had haunted Jack all night, a child's cry, this time clear and unmistakable, coming from the house. The dog's behavior changed instantly. The brindle one looked back at the house, then at Jack, then back at the house. The other three maintained their protective stance, but their aggression had been replaced by what almost looked like uncertainty. "They want me to follow them," Jack realized with sudden clarity. The thought was absurd, but no more absurd than anything else about this situation. Slowly, he rose and took a step toward the house. The dogs parted to let him pass, falling into formation around him like an honor guard. The front door hung askew on its hinges, opening into a foyer thick with dust and cobwebs. The dogs led him up a creaking staircase to what must have been a nursery, and there, in a makeshift nest of old blankets and cushions, was something that made Jack's heart stop. A baby boy, no more than a year old, lay surrounded by stuffed animals and what appeared to be carefully arranged scraps of food. Despite the filthy conditions, the child was surprisingly clean, and while thin, he didn't appear severely malnourished. The bulldogs had been caring for him, protecting him, keeping him alive. As Jack approached, the brindle dog moved between them, its expression clear. "Look, but don't touch." "Not yet." The baby noticed Jack and reached out with tiny hands, making soft cooing sounds. Around the nest were scattered evidence of the dog's care. Empty food containers they must have scavenged, water bottles they'd somehow carried in, even a few clean diapers that they'd likely stolen from outdoor storage bins or unattended shopping carts. "My God!" Jack whispered. "How long have you been keeping him alive?" The scene defied everything he thought he knew about both animals and human nature. These dogs hadn't just protected the baby, they'd created a primitive but effective system of care. They'd worked together, planned, adapted. But where were the parents? And why had the entire town seemed determined to prevent him from discovering this? Jack pulled out his phone to call the authorities, but there was no signal. Of course not. He'd have to go back to his house to make the call. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something else, a photo frame lying face down in the corner. Carefully, he picked it up. The photo showed a young couple with the baby, all smiling, and behind them stood the 4 bulldogs, pristine and well-groomed. They were standing in front of this very house, but when it was still beautiful, still a home. The timestamp on the photo was from just 8 months ago. A floorboard creaked behind him, and Jack spun around to find himself face to face with Sarah, the waitress from the diner. She held a bag of baby supplies and looked completely unsurprised to see him there. "I've been bringing what I can," she said quietly. "Ever since it happened. The dogs know me now. They let me help." "What happened to them?" Jack asked, holding up the photo. "The parents?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "That's the thing, Mr. Morrison. Nobody knows. They just vanished one night. Left everything behind: clothes, cars, phones. Even she swallowed hard. Even their baby. The police said there was no evidence of foul play, but there was money involved. Bad money. The kind that makes people disappear." The baby had crawled to the brindle dog, wrapping his tiny arms around its thick neck. The dog nuzzled him gently, displaying a tenderness that seemed impossible from such a powerful creature. "Why didn't anyone help?" Jack demanded. "Why did everyone try to keep me away?" "Because the people responsible are still watching," Sarah whispered. "They watch everything. The dogs are the only reason they haven't." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "The dogs were trained protection animals. Military grade. They're the only thing keeping him safe until..." A sharp bark from outside cut her off. One of the dogs that had been standing guard shot into the room, its posture alerting the others. Sarah's face went pale. "They're here," she breathed. "They've seen you. We need to get the baby out. Now." Jack's heart pounded as he helped Sarah gather the baby and essential supplies. The bulldogs moved with military precision, 2 taking point down the stairs while the other 2 flanked them protectively. The brindle leader, whom Sarah called Max, kept close to the baby, his powerful body tense and alert. They barely made it to Jack's SUV before headlights appeared at the farm's entrance. Sarah ducked down in the back seat with the baby while Jack tried to look casual, pretending to check his engine with the hood up. A black sedan rolled past slowly, its tinted windows revealing nothing of its occupants. The dogs had melted into the shadows, invisible but present, like guardian spirits. Once the sedan disappeared down the road, Jack slammed the hood and jumped into the driver's seat. "My house isn't safe," he said, starting the engine. "They've seen my car here. Take the back road to St. Mary's Church," Sarah directed. "Father Mackenzie will help us. He knew the Hollands. The drive through Millbrook's darkened streets felt surreal. The baby had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, peaceful despite the tension surrounding him. At each intersection, Jack expected to see the black sedan, but the roads remained eerily empty. Too empty. St. Mary's Church rose from the darkness like a stone sentinel, its Gothic architecture a stark contrast to the town's rural simplicity. Father Mackenzie was waiting at the side door, his weathered face grave. He ushered them quickly inside, leading them through the church to a hidden door behind the altar. "The catacombs," he explained, lifting a trapdoor. "Built during Prohibition. The Hollands aren't the first family this town has had to protect." As they descended the narrow stairs, the priest began to speak, his voice heavy with the weight of secrets long held. "Thomas and Marie Holland moved here 2 years ago, running from something they never fully explained. Thomas had been a military contractor, working with specialized canine units. Those dogs, they're not just trained, they're part of a program that..." He hesitated. "Well, let's say their abilities go beyond what most would consider normal." The catacombs opened into a surprisingly well-maintained room, complete with cots, supplies, and even a small kitchen. Sarah laid the baby on a cot while Father Mackenzie continued. "The Hollands thought they were safe here. Thomas had uncovered something during his work, corruption, wrong experiments, something big enough that certain people wanted him silenced. He trusted those dogs more than any human security. Said they had capabilities that made them perfect guardians." A noise from above made them all freeze. Heavy footsteps echoed through the church. "They're here," Sarah whispered. Father Mackenzie moved quickly to a corner, pressing what looked like an ordinary stone. A hidden panel slid open. "The dogs," he said urgently. "Call them." Jack looked confused, but Sarah understood. She pulled out her phone and pressed a single button. Within minutes, they heard the soft click of claws on stone as all 4 bulldogs emerged from the darkness of the tunnel, somehow having known exactly where to go. "The Hollands set up a network," Sarah explained to Jack. "Underground tunnels, safe houses, ways for the dogs to move unseen. The whole town knows about it, but no one talks. Some help, like Father Mackenzie and me. Others look away out of fear. The rest..." She trailed off. "The rest are on their payroll," a new voice finished. They turned to see Margaret Whitaker descending the stairs, accompanied by Officer Jenkins. Jack tensed, but the dogs showed no aggression. They knew these people. "We're part of the network," Jenkins said, his gruff demeanor replaced by urgent professionalism. "Have been since the Hollands first came to us. Those men upstairs? They're not just looking for evidence anymore. They're here to clean up loose ends, including anyone who knows too much." The baby stirred, whimpering softly. Max immediately went to him, laying his massive head gently on the cot. The other dogs took up defensive positions around the room. Thomas Holland discovered that the military contractor he worked for, Black River Solutions, wasn't just training enhanced dogs, Margaret revealed, her earlier nervous demeanor completely gone. They were experimenting with ways to increase canine intelligence and loyalty to unprecedented levels. But the process was cruel, wrong. Most dogs didn't survive. These 4? She gestured to the bulldogs. They were different. The only ones who maintained their empathy along with their enhanced abilities. Thomas couldn't bear to see them destroyed, so he took them and ran. "The baby," Jack said, realization dawning. "They're not just protecting him. They're raising him," Sarah finished. "Using everything they learned about human care from their training. They can understand complex commands, recognize threats, even problem-solve at near-human levels. When the Hollands disappeared, the dogs knew exactly what to do. They've been keeping him alive, waiting for someone they could trust to help." A crash echoed from above, followed by footsteps and voices. Father Mackenzie moved to another hidden panel, revealing a tunnel entrance. "This leads to the old mill by the river. There's a boat ready. Margaret will take you to a safe house in the next county." "But the Hollands," Jack pressed. "Are they finished?" Jenkins shook his head. "In witness protection. They had to leave the baby behind that night. The dogs were the only way to protect him until they could secure safe passage for the whole family. We've been waiting for their signal, keeping watch, helping where we can. But now that Black River knows you've discovered him. Another crash, closer this time. We need to move, Margaret urged. Jack, you have a choice to make. Walk away now, or become part of this. But if you stay, there's no going back. These people, they don't leave loose ends. Jack looked at the sleeping baby, at the 4 loyal dogs who had done the impossible to keep him safe, at these townspeople who had maintained their silent vigil for so long. He thought about his old life in Boston, about fresh starts and second chances. When do we leave? He asked. The sound of splintering wood came from above. They were running out of time. The tunnel was narrow and damp, forcing them to move in single file. Jack carried the baby while Max led the way, the dog's enhanced senses proving invaluable in the darkness. The other 3 bulldogs brought up the rear, with Margaret between them. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but no one dared slow down. Wait! Max suddenly growled. Yes, growled in a way that sounded almost like speech, and stopped at a junction in the tunnel. His head turned toward a seemingly solid wall, nose twitching. Margaret's flashlight beam revealed what the dog had sensed, a slight discoloration in the ancient brick. Thomas's markers, she explained, pressing a specific brick. A small compartment opened, revealing a waterproof case. Inside they found a USB drive, a handwritten journal, and a set of coordinates. But it was the photograph beneath these items that made Jack's breath catch. It showed a laboratory with rows of kennels, each containing a dog hooked up to ominous-looking machinery. The image was dated just 3 years ago. Black River's real research facility, Margaret explained as they hurried forward again. Thomas documented everything. The genetic modifications, the neural enhancements, the failed experiments. But what they really wanted, what they're still after. She glanced meaningfully at the dogs. It wasn't just about creating smarter dogs. They were trying to develop the perfect guardian, beings with the loyalty and instincts of canines but the problem-solving abilities of humans. They emerged into the old mill's basement, the rush of the river audible through the walls. As Margaret secured the tunnel entrance behind them, Jack began reading Thomas Holland's journal, his lawyer's mind cataloging every damning detail. They started with conventional military dog training, he read aloud, but moved into genetic modification by 2019. Most subjects finished. Those that survived showed increased intelligence but became unstable, aggressive. Then came Batch 7, Max, Rex, Shadow, and Duke. They were different. The enhanced intelligence merged perfectly with their natural empathy. They could understand complex situations, make independent decisions, even anticipate human needs. But they never lost their fundamental dog nature, their loyalty, their protective instincts. A crash from somewhere above made them all freeze. Margaret gestured toward a hidden door behind some old machinery. The boat dock is through there. But first, there's something else you need to see. She led them to what appeared to be an ordinary storage room. The dogs immediately spread out, taking defensive positions with practiced efficiency. Margaret pulled out a key and opened a heavy filing cabinet, revealing not files but a sophisticated computer setup. Thomas's failsafe, she explained, booting up the system. Everything he discovered, everyone involved, all the evidence, it's all here, scheduled to automatically upload to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency if the right code isn't entered every 72 hours. The Hollands may be in witness protection, but this? She gestured to the screen. This is their real insurance policy. The computer displayed a countdown, 47 hours 13 minutes and 22 seconds. That's why they're here now, Jack realized. Not just for the baby. They somehow found out about the failsafe. Exactly, Margaret nodded. Thomas arranged it so only the dogs know the full access code. It's based on their unique behavioral patterns. Black River can't shut it down without them, can't risk finishing them. It's why they've been searching instead of just burning everything down. A series of documents filled the screen: internal memos, research data, financial records. Jack's eyes widened as he recognized names: senators, military officials, corporate executives. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone had imagined. The baby stirred in Jack's arms, and Max immediately came over, checking on him with an almost human concern. Looking at the dog's intelligent eyes, Jack suddenly understood something else. "The baby," he said slowly. "He's not just an innocent bystander, is he? The dogs aren't just protecting him because they were loyal to the Hollands. He's part of the experiment too." Margaret's silence was answer enough. "The final phase," she finally said, pulling up another file. "Black River wasn't just creating enhanced dogs. They were working towards something bigger, a perfect synthesis. The dogs were phase 1. The baby, he was meant to be phase 2. Enhanced human intelligence from birth, guided and bonded with enhanced canine guardians. The Hollands discovered Marie was pregnant during the project. Black River saw it as an opportunity. That's why they ran," Jack whispered, looking down at the sleeping child. "Not just to expose the project, but to save their son from becoming part of it." The baby's tiny hand reached out in his sleep, and Max gently nuzzled it. The bond between them was suddenly clear, not just protective, but almost symbiotic. The dogs weren't just raising him, they were connected to him on a level that science had never intended but nature had somehow perfected. A new sound echoed through the mill: helicopter rotors. "Black River's extraction team," Margaret said grimly. "They're done being subtle. We need to move." "The boat." The door burst open. 3 men in tactical gear entered, weapons raised. But before anyone could react, something extraordinary happened. The 4 dogs moved in perfect synchronization, each executing a precise takedown that spoke of both their enhanced abilities and their military training. Within seconds, the intruders were disarmed and pinned. "My God!" Jack breathed. "They really are something else." "You have no idea," Margaret replied, quickly gathering the computer's hard drive and the journal. "And if we don't get that baby to his parents, and this evidence to the right people, you never will. Black River will make sure of that." The helicopter sounds grew closer. They had only moments to reach the boat, and somewhere in the darkness, more Black River operatives were closing in. But as Jack looked at the 4 extraordinary dogs standing guard around them, he felt something he hadn't expected: hope. The real question was, would it be enough to get them through the night alive? The river churned black beneath the moonless sky as Jack, Margaret, and their unusual companions raced toward the concealed dock. The baby, somehow sensing the gravity of their situation, remained eerily quiet. The dogs moved like shadows, their enhanced senses alert to every threat. They were halfway to the dock when Max suddenly stiffened, his muscular body going rigid with alert. Before anyone could react, a spotlight blazed from above, turning night into artificial day. The helicopter had found them. "Down!" Margaret shouted, pulling Jack and the baby behind a rusted piece of machinery. The dogs moved with incredible coordination, Rex and Duke taking defensive positions while Shadow melted into the darkness on some unseen mission. Max stayed close to the baby, his body tensed for action. "Margaret Whitaker!" A voice boomed from above. "This is Director Carson of Black River Solutions. You have something that belongs to us." Margaret's face went pale. "They sent Carson himself," she whispered to Jack. "This is worse than we thought. He's the one who designed the original program, and the one who ordered the Hollands' elimination." The baby stirred, making a soft sound that was almost immediately soothed by Max's gentle rumble. Jack watched in amazement as the dog seemed to communicate silently with his companions, their enhanced intelligence evident in every coordinated movement. "You don't understand what you're protecting," Carson's voice continued. "That child represents the next step in human evolution. Think of the possibilities. A human being with enhanced cognitive abilities from birth, connected symbiotically with advanced canine guardians. The perfect merger of human intelligence and animal instinct. He's insane," Jack muttered, clutching the baby closer. "He's talking about the baby like he's some kind of experiment. To them, that's all he is," Margaret replied grimly. "But there's something else going on here. Carson wouldn't risk exposing himself like this unless. Her eyes widened with sudden understanding. The failsafe. It's not just about the evidence anymore. They need the baby too. His genetic code must be part of the final verification sequence. A series of sharp cracks split the air, not gunfire, but the sound of Shadow, the fourth dog, systematically disabling the helicopter's searchlights from his hidden vantage point. The night plunged back into darkness, but their relief was short-lived. "Breach teams, move in!" Carson ordered. The sound of multiple footsteps surrounded them as Black River operatives emerged from the shadows, their tactical gear making them look more machine than human. What happened next defied everything Jack thought he knew about the limits of animal intelligence. The four dogs moved like a single organism, each executing a part of what was clearly a pre-planned strategy. Shadow, having returned from his mission, created a diversion on the far side of the yard. Rex and Duke herded the approaching operatives into carefully chosen positions, while Max did something extraordinary. He rushed to an old control panel and, with shocking precision, hit a specific sequence of buttons with his paw. Suddenly, the old mill's sprinkler system roared to life, but instead of water, it sprayed something that made the Black River operatives cry out in pain. "Capsaicin solution," Margaret explained, a grim smile on her face. "Thomas Holland's last line of defense. The dogs knew it was here all along, they were just waiting for the right moment. But their advantage was temporary." Through the chaos, a figure emerged, Director Carson himself, wearing a protective mask and carrying what looked like a sophisticated tranquilizer gun. "Enough games?" he snarled. "That baby is the key to everything we've worked for. The perfect subject, enhanced human capabilities combined with the loyalty programming we perfected in the dogs. He'll be the prototype for a new generation of human beings, ones who can be programmed from birth to serve the right causes, the right people." "You're talking about slavery," Jack said, disgust evident in his voice. "About turning human beings into weapons." "I'm talking about evolution," Carson shouted. "About taking control of humanity's destiny. Those dogs, they were just the beginning. Imagine soldiers with their loyalty, their capabilities, but with human intelligence. Imagine children born and raised to be perfect operatives, their every instinct programmed from birth." The baby began to cry, a sound that triggered an immediate response from all four dogs. They moved into a defensive formation that spoke of both their military training and their enhanced intelligence, but there was something else in their behavior, a protective instinct that went beyond programming, beyond even their augmented abilities. "You still don't understand," Margaret said to Carson, her voice carrying across the yard. "You created something you couldn't control, not because it was flawed, but because it was too perfect. The dog's enhanced intelligence didn't override their capacity for love, it deepened it. They're not protecting the baby because of programming. They're protecting him because they choose to." As if to prove her point, Max did something that made even Carson step back in shock. The dog looked directly at the baby and made a series of sounds that were neither barks nor growls, but something in between, almost like speech. The baby stopped crying immediately, reaching out toward the dog with complete trust. In that moment, the true nature of their bond became clear, not the artificial synthesis Black River had intended, but something far more profound. A new sound cut through the tension, police sirens, dozens of them, approaching fast. "That's impossible," Carson spat. "We have the local authorities contained." "Local authorities, yes," came a new voice as Officer Jenkins emerged from the shadows, holding a radio. "But the FBI? They've been very interested in Black River's activities, especially after receiving an anonymous tip about unauthorized human experimentation." Carson's face contorted with rage. He raised his weapon, no longer caring about taking the baby alive. But before he could fire, all four dogs moved as one, their enhanced abilities on full display as they executed a takedown maneuver that was both precisely military and uniquely canine. As Carson hit the ground, the baby let out a sound that was almost like laughter. The dog's mission wasn't over, but for the first time since this night began, victory seemed possible. They just had to survive the next few minutes as Black River's remaining operatives, trapped and desperate, prepared for one final move. But they hadn't counted on the perfect storm they were facing, for enhanced dogs working in flawless coordination, FBI tactical teams flooding the compound, and a small group of people who'd do anything to protect an extraordinary child. Jack, still holding the baby, watched in amazement as Max orchestrated a defense that seemed almost supernatural in its precision. The 4 dogs moved like pieces on a chessboard, anticipating and countering every threat with an intelligence that went far beyond their programming. They weren't just fighting, they were protecting, calculating, adapting, showing exactly why Black River had been both so proud and so afraid of what they'd created. The baby, throughout all of this, remained remarkably calm, his tiny hands occasionally reaching out toward the dogs as if he could sense their presence even when they weren't visible. The connection between them was undeniable, but it wasn't the artificial synthesis Black River had intended. It was something purer, more natural, a bond formed through months of care and protection. As they secured the scene, a helicopter approached, different from Black River's, bearing government markings. When it landed, 2 figures emerged that made the dogs suddenly stop and stand at attention: Thomas and Marie Holland. "We got the signal," Thomas explained as Marie rushed to take her baby, tears streaming down her face. "When the fail-safe countdown began, we knew it was time. Our handlers and witness protection couldn't stop us from coming, not when we knew our son needed us." The reunion was extraordinary. The baby, seeing his parents for the first time in months, showed no fear or hesitation. The dogs formed a circle around the reunited family, their posture both protective and joyful. Max approached Marie and gently nuzzled the baby, causing the child to laugh, a sound of pure happiness that seemed to wash away the tension of the night. "The evidence has been secured," an FBI agent reported, holding up the hard drive from Thomas's hidden computer. "Between this and Carson's confession, Black River won't be able to bury this anymore. We've already arrested 3 senators and 2 military generals who were involved in the program." Thomas knelt beside Max, scratching behind the dog's ears. "They wanted to create the perfect weapon," he said softly. "Instead, they created something they couldn't control, beings capable of not just intelligence, but wisdom. The dogs didn't just protect our son, they raised him, cared for him, loved him. They showed more humanity than the humans who created them. But there was still one crucial decision to be made." Marie looked at Jack, who had been standing quietly to the side, watching the reunion. "We can't go back into witness protection," she said. "Not now. But we can't raise our son alone anymore either. Black River might be finished, but their allies are still out there. We need someone we can trust, someone who's proven they'll do the right thing, no matter the cost." Jack understood what she was asking. His old life in Boston seemed like a distant memory now. The corporate law career, the failed marriage, the search for a fresh start, it had all led him here, to this moment. "The house I bought," he said slowly. "It's pretty big for one person. And it does have a lot of land, perfect for 4 dogs who deserve to run free." The decision was made. Over the next few months, the story played out across national headlines: Black River conspiracy exposed. Enhanced Canine program revealed. Corporate executives and government officials indicted. But in Millbrook, a different, quieter story was unfolding. The Holland family moved into Jack's house, which soon became a home filled with laughter, barking, and the sound of running feet, both human and canine. The dogs, finally free to live openly, became local celebrities. People would watch in amazement as they helped with household chores, played complex games with the baby, and continued to show intelligence that blurred the line between animal and human. Sarah and Officer Jenkins became regular visitors, along with Margaret and Father Mackenzie. The underground network that had protected the baby transformed into a close-knit family of friends, bound together by the extraordinary events they'd witnessed. The baby, now growing into a toddler, showed signs of enhanced cognitive development, but not in the way Black River had intended. His connection with the dogs had created something entirely new, a child who understood instinctively the balance between intelligence and empathy, between power and responsibility. He was growing up surrounded by protectors who were also teachers, guides who were also friends. 1 year to the day after that first night when Jack heard the crying and barking, he sat on his porch watching an incredible scene. His adopted nephew, as he'd become, playing in the yard, the 4 dogs orchestrating what looked like a complex learning game. Max would present a puzzle, the other dogs would demonstrate different solutions, and the child would laugh and clap as he figured out his own way to solve it. Marie joined him on the porch, handing him a coffee. "Sometimes I wonder," she said, "if this is what Black River was really afraid of. Not that their experiment would fail, but that it would succeed in a way they never expected. They wanted to create weapons, but instead they created teachers. They wanted to program loyalty, but they created love." As if hearing her words, Max looked up from the game and made that strange, almost speech sound they'd all grown used to. The baby responded with perfect understanding, and together, child and dogs continued their play, a family unlike any the world had seen before, but a family nonetheless. "You know," Jack said, sipping his coffee, "when I moved here looking for a fresh start, this wasn't exactly what I had in mind." Marie laughed. "Life rarely gives us what we're looking for," she replied. "Sometimes it gives us what we need instead." In the yard, the game continued. 4 extraordinary dogs, 1 remarkable child, and a group of people who had chosen to stand against darkness, not for power or profit, but for the simple, profound truth that love, in all its forms, was the greatest force for good in the world. The sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. From somewhere in the distance came the sound of barking, normal dogs, living normal lives. But here, in this yard, something miraculous continued to unfold, a story of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals, proving that family isn't about species or programming or DNA. It's about choice. About love. About finding hope in the darkest places and holding onto it with everything you have. And sometimes, it's about 4 incredible dogs who chose to become heroes, protectors, and family to a child who needed them, and in doing so, help create something better than any laboratory could have engineered, a home.